first day saw keynote speaker Dr. Busch from the London School of Economics take the stage. He began his talk on innovation for a fast-moving world by talking about success and failure.
I was asked to kind of give a bit of an overview of some of the broader trends we've seen over the last 8 years. We've been working in this innovation and co-creation lab, focusing on business model innovation around the world, trying to understand what are the kind of success patterns and failure patterns we've seen across industries, particularly also in IT, but also other sectors, and what can we learn from that. And I hope to share some of the insights with you that hopefully will be helpful and relevant.
He talked about the new networked economy, such as cloud, the ability of poorer people in developing countries to hook into the global economy, and the role that technology can play. He said there was a new generation with a new mindset, people looking for a deeper meaning.
The interesting thing, though, is when you look at companies nowadays, they are still explicitly or implicitly based on this very old Maslow hierarchy of needs. Who of you came across Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Yeah, so maybe 50%. So Maslow used to say, back in the 50s, 60s, he said, well, look, humans have very similar needs that they fulfill after and after. So they first have material needs. So they first, in our kind of, when we translate that to today, they need some kind of like material protection. They need money and all these different things. Then they have safety needs, then emotional needs, esteem needs. And then when they still have time, in the end, they self-actualize. That's when the real purpose comes in. That's when all this quest for meaning comes in. That comes in when you have everything else fulfilled. So it's, in a way, a relatively linear approach.
Busch then talked about the power of groups and a new form of leadership by example, and how that changes communities.
So what I always find interesting when working with particularly bigger companies in the banking sectors and consulting sectors, where you have a lot of extremely bright people, extremely driven people. But what you see is that their productivity is relatively low in some occasions, where they, during the day, work on something, and then in the evening they work on their passion project. And the passion project, the startup they want to set up, the NGO they support, that's where their heart is. Their mind is in the day job, their heart is in the passion project. And so what we're really interested in is to say, how do we get that into the company, that these people actually are there with heart and mind, which kind of not only increases productivity, but also creativity, innovation, and so on.
He then moved on to decentralization and crowdsourcing.
And so the interesting thing is that we kind of like in the work over the last years have seen different patterns emerging in companies where it seemed that if they tweak these different pillars, they kind of went more and more towards high-performing organizations. The first one is around the action-driven purpose. So there's no news that an organization that has a purpose can do a lot in terms of getting people more interested, but the action-driven purpose is really all about the question. A lot of people, when you ask them about themselves, or when you ask them what they do, they're very good at saying, hey, I do this, my company do this, we produce this and this software, we produce this and this hardware. So it's very easy to say what one does. But the question is, what really gets people excited is why something happened. Why a company is there, what is the real purpose behind that this endeavor actually happens.
Busch then talked about empowerment and 4 steps that can help to bring about the 5 pillars he mentioned at the start.
The bigger purpose is around why do we do what we do, how do we get the right people on board by kind of leadership that excites people, and how do we work with existing communities and get them excited. The second one is around genuine values. To give an example, this is Holsti. Holsti is an enterprise in New York City, and they wrote a manifesto around 5 years ago where they wrote down their values. And values including that you should live your life to the fullest and very kind of creative type inspired values. And nothing happened for a couple of days. And guess how many times it was downloaded by today? 100 million times. 100 million times. That was one of the most interesting kind of viral campaigns ever, because it was genuinely driven by what they now use in their company. Everything they do in the company is somehow informed by these values, from the supply chain to how they work with people. The third one is around, we had some discussions in the morning, how the cloud obviously enables decentralization, how the cloud enables to if you have subsidiaries around the world, to be more empowered with their own kind of solutions. So this unpronounceable name, volcano, E13, broke out. And what happened was, so at that time when the volcano broke out, there was a conference in Oxford and Cambridge happening. So the Skoll World Forum, the World Economic Forum had a big event. And it broke out, and all these people were stuck in London. And so all these people had their schedules completely cleared. And so I got a call in the morning by a member of our community at that point, Nathaniel, who lived in San Francisco but came to London for these conferences. So within 28 hours, he put together a full-fledged conference. He called up TED and said, hey, give me your brand. He called up the Hub and said, give me your place. He called up Sandbox, say, give me your volunteers. Within 28 hours, he organized TEDx Volcano, which was one of the most successful TEDx events. He leveraged the power of being able to decentralizedly using not only technology, but also using existing brands like TED and so on, to actually pull something up at that scale. The fourth one, I don't have to tell you a lot about. I guess that will be a lot of the kind of conversations of the next days, and also you're the experts in kind of technology. But some of the things I find most interesting on the technology side is actually not only how you can use things like the cloud and other things nowadays as platforms, so less as solutions but as platforms, but also how these allow us to hold people accountable. So to make peer-to-peer accountability much more probable to happen. The last one is obviously around how do we also better measure things that we can't capture that easily, right? So it was always very easy to capture profits. It's very easy to capture kind of sales growth. But how do you capture things like meaning? How do you capture things like the social impact that is to be had? And those of you who are interested, I think there's a lot of briefings today. I'm very happy to dive deeper into kind of the metrics, for example, of Acumen funds, where they're extremely good at saying, how do we track the outcomes in the long run of what we actually do?
He concluded with these remarks.
So where does that leave us? It's one of the interesting things I feel is that kind of when we look at the more these trends we just talked about, that we get away from kind of just product innovation, right? Product innovation used to be, okay, how do we create the next best operating system, or the next best shampoo, or the next best kind of whatever the product is, to more system innovation. How do we now understand the whole supply chains and the value chains of different companies, to then understand how do we get the model for everyone right? So what we see is things that iTunes and Facebook and others did. They built platforms upon which other people can build their own business models and help them build these business models. And you have this amazing network effect where the more the one can sell, the more the other can sell. So we see the kind of iTunes and Apple Store type effects we see in a lot of sectors. And they are now more about system innovation and less about product innovation. One of the things I feel interesting also, particularly in the IT and the technology sector, we talked about security. I feel another thing is also really about reputation. How do you take the reputation of someone who has a great reputation on Uber, if you have 4.9 stars or 5 stars on Uber, and is there a way to translate that to Airbnb? And is there a way to translate the ratings of Airbnb to how you get your next mortgage? Or, so what are the transferable bits of reputation across the net? And what are the bits that cannot be transferred, and having kind of platforms built for this? A third one, which is really interesting at the moment, is the whole question of reverse innovation. So how do you actually learn from low-cost innovation in developing countries and then kind of transfer this back? General Electric and others, for example, some of the most interesting technologies come out of India, where they could, for low-cost experiments, and then bring that back into the West. And then also tackling the really bigger societal issues. We talked about earlier how this generation Y is more about meaning, and a lot of meaning comes also by tackling real issues rather than just developing new markets, which also then has a big implication for which new markets could be opened up, because we would see people not as vulnerable in some areas, but we would say, hey, actually, they could be potential co-creators if we find good ways to do that. Thank you.